With each new design, Exclusive has been gaining popularity in the community. That, combined with the smoothness of every group ray he runs, a board in the popular 65% layout was a must-have for me. He wanted to limit this to 100 slots, but because he overestimated the time it took to reach that point, a lot of people ended up joining. Thankfully, he decided to honor all of those orders. Despite the increased production volume, the group buy delivered without major hurdles. The board ships in a nice box with a sleeve around it. The inner box has a pretty cool design. You get the keyboard, the gasket, some stickers, extra screws, and a pair of gloves. I appreciate the amount of attention paid to the unboxing experience. Exclusive's recent designs include the E6.5, which I have one of, as well as the E7.5. These are both relatively creative while staying in the comfort zone of the Western keyboard community. In contrast, there's not much to the design of the E6.5. It's the tried and true box angled by a platform approach. It's got reasonably thin bezels and has that signature badge on the upper right corner. This was available with a couple different tops, but I just got the simple arrow key blocker version. The single 0.5 U blocker is not super out of place in relation to the thickness of the bezels, but I may be reversing my opinion on blocked 65% layouts. It's a compact layout and the blocker is just slightly aesthetically inconsistent. I was upset that my polycarbonate Singa showed the PCB through the blockers. The issue persists on the E6.5. The plate covers most of the blocked area, but leaves a sliver of gap, pretty disappointing. The side profile is in the style of the TGR 910, which is just a wedge placed underneath the box. However, unlike the 910, the wedge on the 6.5 starts a couple centimeters in from the front of the board. So this actually ends up being a truncated box sitting on a wedge. The back is very similar to the Singa, but with the improvement of the top and bottom pieces being approximately the same thickness. This, in my opinion, gives the rear profile some visual balance, as opposed to the bottom-heavy look on the Singa. The only thing on the rear is that welcome USB-C port and the badge. The badge comes down about a third of the thickness of the top piece, which I feel is an improvement over the E6, whose badge touched the mid-piece. I'll get more into it in the eventual E6 review, but it made sense to use the same color for the badge and mid-layer, and them touching just made the area look messy. The badge on the E6.5 is located left of the rightmost key, and I think it would have been better to be in the absolute corner like in the E6. I have the Polycarbonate 6.5, which has the same visual characteristics as the Polycarbonate Singa. When resting on a surface, the bottom piece goes totally dark, creating an almost two-tone look. The bottom has a slot for a two-piece weight that screw in from the inside of the case. I much prefer this new logo to the old one. It has a lot more thought put into it and is way less resembling a swastika. The aluminum version has bottoms with slots cut into them to let the light shine through. A byproduct of this is that the PCB only has LEDs on the far left and right corners, so even with a fully polycarbonate bottom, you can't light it up completely. Not that I really care about that. Overall, the design is pretty okay. I like it enough, but there isn't much to say about it. It's not really an iconic or striking look like the E6.5 or the E7.5. This is sort of a generic looking custom 65%. However, that's probably just my fault, because a wacky HHKB blocker version does exist. It seems to me that Exclusive usually adds one weird thing to a classic design to really make it his, and that top option was his goal, but just too many people complained about that. The board is held together by 8 gold hex screws from the bottom. Inside, it's the exact same story as the Singa, just a regular old top mount keyboard, but with the added option of using a gasket. I'll go more into that later. The top piece, as usual, is just a floppy piece with 8 mounting points. You also have the slot for the badge. The interior weight slots into the bottom with the 2 side screws, and the inner weight screws into the outer weight via just one. You can see here that the quality of the finish on the 6.5 is actually not that great. On the outside of the bottom, there are scrape marks in the steps. I can only make them out in harsh light though. The inside of the bottom is a worse story. You can actually see the entirety of the machining marks, which might have been excusable if this was aluminum, but the translucent material makes them visible from the outside as well. The area right underneath the weight is the worst offender, with a machining line that's visible without shining any light on the case. I got in touch with Exclusive about this, and he explained some of the difficulties in machining polycarbonate and sort of the inevitability of marks. Since these are effectively raw material finishes, all of those marks are going to show up when compared to aluminum boards that usually get treatment that hides its flaws. However, it is notable that my polycarbonate Singa, which is in the same price range, has a superior finish. On the bottom piece, which is very similar to the 6.5, there are no machining marks at all, and the surface finish is very consistent. Because I've only ever examined 2 polycarbonate boards under this level of scrutiny, I can't say for sure if the 6.5 is a failure or if the Singa is an achievement. I have heard from others about polycarbonate cases tending to be flawed, so it's probably just the Singa that's impressive. I don't personally care too much about this stuff, but I know a lot of people buying expensive customs want an absolutely flawless finish, so that's something to think about before going with PC. Another minor nitpick is that when the board is screwed in, there are tiny little gaps on both sides between the top and bottom cases. It appears to be the bottom lip that's ever so slightly warped. Again, not a huge deal for me, but something to keep in mind. One problem I have with the E6 is that the 3 layers are sort of free to slide past each other, which can make alignment during assembly frustrating. This is due to the fact that the layers don't have alignment guides that lock everything into place. This is continued on the 6.5, so if you aren't just perfect with your assembly, you'll be able to easily feel the slight misalignments between the top and bottom cases. This is again in contrast to the Singa, which has tight-fitting alignment aids on the sides. Also like the E6.5, the PCB is a goldish yellowish color with visible traces. Maybe it's sort of a signature color for exclusive, but I wish it was more neutral like black or white, since I can actually see it through this case. Unlike the E6, the 6.5 uses standard key spacing of 19.05mm. The E6 used a 19mm spacing, but the bottom row was miscalculated, so there were some issues with the spacebar colliding into the adjacent keys. That's not an issue here, so no need to worry. This board was offered in a ton of different configurations, but I really wanted to lean into the theme of polycarbonate, lightness, and flexibility, so I got the PC case, PC half plate, and aluminum accents. The result is a shockingly light keyboard. At under 2 pounds, this rivals the HHKB in feeling like a toy. Even though I keep saying over and over that weight doesn't equal quality, it's hard to not feel just a bit disappointed when I pick this up. The typing experience on the E6.5 in general is no doubt highly variable, as there were many case and plate material options, so I'll just comment on mine. For standardized testing, I'm using bone stock Gateron yellows with milky tops and black bottoms. The area not covered by the plate is unsurprisingly very much like a plateless build. It's a bouncy experience where bottom-out reverberations are not readily transferred to the inactive hand. This is very similar to my IDB60, which is plateless. The parts that are covered by the plate is ever so slightly more stiff, but because there's no chance that you'll have 2 hands on one side, it's not really noticeable. Now to the gasket. There are a lot of different gasket-mounted boards coming out nowadays, so it's pointless to try to unpack the term, but this is how it works on the E6.5. Normally, you don't even have to use the rubber band. You can screw the plate into the top and you just have a regular old top mount. When you're using the rubber band, you install it around the gap between the PCB and the plate, and no longer uses the top mounting screws. I usually install it by first putting the assembly into the top, where it somewhat friction fits, and then screwing the bottom on. Internally, there are a couple components. The bottom has these raised areas that are not used at all when the board is top mount. These are what the rubber bands rest on when gasket mounting. Further, the outer perimeter of the rubber band also makes contact with the inner perimeter of the top, which is what happens in the Unicorn. So when fully assembled, the tabs on the plate still contact the top case where it would have screwed into. So in this case, the plate is not totally isolated from the case like in some styles of gasket mounting solutions. As for the differences between the two mounts, I don't think it's significant. As a matter of fact, I wrote this only after I recorded the sound test with and without the gaskets. I don't know about you, but I don't hear any difference in sound. When I look away with the audio playing, I can't even tell when it's changed over. To be fair, my microphone is still the cheap blue Snowball, so it may not be picking up on the subtleties, but if it's there, it's really minimal. There may or may not be a difference in feel. It's really hard for me to test because it takes a couple minutes to swap out the mount, but I don't pick up a difference immediately, so it's probably insignificant. Again, I'm just speaking for my configuration. There may be more noticeable effects on aluminum case, which will hold the gasket more tightly. Exclusive has been a popular designer, and people were quick to join in on this. I don't really get some of the insane $675 aftermarket prices that I've seen, but it is what it is. I'm overall happy with how it turned out because I'm not typically staring into the underside of my keyboard, but it is a little disappointing to see that there are such marked differences between two polycarbonate boards in the same price range. The gasket mount implementation is following the trends, even if it doesn't make a perceptible difference to me. And to be fair, Exclusive was just following a gasket implementation on old Korean boards. The typing experience is agreeable, and because I like 65% better than 75%, I'm probably going to choose this over the Singa every single time, even with inferior quality. But because this is such a basic design with no real quirks like Exclusive's previous works, I don't know if I'm going to have a very strong attachment to it. If I get a Polycarbonate 268 and it's of a higher quality, I wouldn't really feel bad about giving this up. Exclusive has had some interesting designs. This one happens to be a little more basic, but sometimes you want basic. I'll be keeping an eye out for what he has to offer in the future, but I'll have a couple things to think about before choosing a polycarbonate variant.